Hello and welcome to TRT World. I am Chafar Hasner. You're watching our U.S. election special broadcast live from the U.S. Capitol. We are less than 12 days away from one of the most consequential elections in American history. Both Vice President Kamala Harris and former U.S. President Donald Trump are laser focused on the key battleground states. Today, we'll explore the latest developments in U.S. foreign relations with a special focus on the Indo-Pacific region. We'll also take a deep dive into a special report on abortion, one of the most polarizing issues on the ballot in many states. Plus, we'll discuss the pivotal role of Georgia in this election, a state that could once again swing the balance of power. But first, here's the latest U.S. election update from TRT World's Craig Boswell.
In the final sprint to Election Day, Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump carved deep paths through the battleground states essential to winning the White House.
Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?
In Georgia, where more than 2 million people have already cast early ballots, Trump slammed Harris's policies during her time in office.
After all the catastrophes she has caused, Kamala Harris can't say one thing that you'd do differently. You saw that? What would you do differently? I can't think of anything.
Harris also campaigns in Georgia later Thursday, appearing for the first time alongside Barack Obama. Harris has seized on the words of warning from Trump's own chief of staff during Trump's time in the White House.
And it is clear from John Kelly's words that Donald Trump is someone who, I quote, certainly falls into the general definition of fascist, who in fact vowed to be a dictator on day one and vowed to use the military as his personal militia to carry out his personal and political vendettas.
While both candidates work to mobilize support, statewide polling shows no clear leader in Arizona, North Carolina, or Pennsylvania, though some national polling shows Trump ahead by just 1 point for the first time, though it's well within the margin of error. Craig Boswell, TRT World.
With few days to go until the U.S. elections, what would another Donald Trump victory mean for Europe? Some leaders, like Hungary's Viktor Orban, would be happy, but others are wary about his lukewarm commitments to NATO and Ukraine. On trade, for example, he has repeatedly said he would introduce tariffs on European imports, as TRT World's Paul Hawkins reports.
6 years ago, these Spanish olives would have been heading for their biggest market, the US. But in 2018, President Trump's tariffs meant exports dropped by 70%. Designed to protect US olive producers, it was part of his America First strategy, and nothing's changed.
We're going to bring thousands and thousands of businesses and trillions of dollars in wealth back to the good old USA. That's what we're going to be doing it, and doing it fast.
Land of the free, but less so free trade. Should he win the election, Trump's promising to go further with across-the-board tariffs of up to 20% on European imports, with whom America has annual trade worth over $1 trillion. In fact, despite the tariffs, America still buys a lot more from Europe than it sells it. In other words, a trade deficit, which actually continued to grow under his presidency.
You know what's very tough? European Union, our beautiful European countries, wonderful, wonderful. If you add them up, they're almost the size of us. They treat us so badly. We have a deficit. They don't want anything from us. We have deficits that are crazy, and we're not going to have them anymore. We're going to put tariffs on them.
It's challenging to see that the open US market increasingly shuts itself off, and this is what happened under the Biden administration. The danger that Donald Trump, if he becomes president, further increases this conflict is clear. It has actually been announced that in this case, the United States would introduce tariffs, for example, on automobiles. We would then get bigger and bigger problems, and that should be seen with great concern.
Europe is more vulnerable to trade restrictions than the US. Half of its output comes from trade compared to double that of the US, while it has more than twice as many manufacturing jobs.
Under my leadership, we're going to take other countries' jobs. Did you ever hear that expression before? Have you ever heard? We're going to bring thousands and thousands of businesses and trillions of dollars in wealth back to the good old USA.
But that could spark a trade war between traditional allies. The EU is reportedly drawing up a list of American imports that might be hit with counter-tariffs if he wins and if he follows through.
And Paul Hawkins joins me live from London. Paul, good to have you. So with Donald Trump leading in some key battleground states, how are European leaders preparing for the possibility of his return to the White House? Is there a sense of relief or concern in London, where you are right now?
Well, it depends on who you speak to, really. As we said in our piece there are some European leaders that would welcome a Donald Trump presidency, such as Viktor Orban, also leaders of various far-right groups that have gained in popularity during recent European elections. And then there are other leaders that would be less privately, and that's a key word, privately less welcoming of the Donald Trump presidency, because as we've just talked about there, he could introduce tariffs on European imports, try and balance up the trade deficit that the US has with the EU. But publicly they're saying that whoever is in the White House, they will work with him. Certainly that's what Sir Keir Starmer has said himself, and I know we'll come on to him. But in terms of how people here are feeling, we've been out on the streets of London today, and London being an international city, there weren't exclusively British people, but we spoke to a wide number of people from around the world and asked them how they're feeling about a potential Trump presidency, and here's what they told us.
I think that Trump will get it.
Who would be best for Europe, do you think?
Well, Trump for Britain, Trump will be best for us because he loves Britain. He's a massive, massive Anglophile.
Does it really make any difference?
Well, yeah, how do you think it's going to affect the country, this country and Europe? No?
I think we'll be fine either way.
I think Harris will continue with Biden's administration. No difference. Same story. And with Trump, it will be a disaster again.
We're from the U.S. I'm studying abroad here right now.
Okay, but do you get to vote?
Yeah, I voted.
You voted already, and you voted for Trump?
Yeah.
Right, okay. So why him and not Harris?
Honestly, a lot of the Democratic Party policies I just don't agree with. And Trump does a lot better with taxes, and inflation is so high right now.
I just don't think Donald Trump is the answer.
Right, so you're hoping he doesn't win, but who do you think's going to win?
Most probably Donald Trump.
Wow, Paul, so mixed opinions there. Let me ask you your personal take on these voxies. Were you taken by surprise after hearing these voices from London?
Yeah, I was, to be honest. I mean, we heard some people who... I mean, you heard that gentleman there at the end. I thought what he had to say was really interesting. He didn't want a Trump presidency, but his financial advisor said, actually, it'd be really good for the economy. So I think he didn't agree with Donald Trump's values and what he may stand for personally or his personality, but he was being told that it would be good for the economy. We spoke to another group of people that I think you saw in that sequence there that were from France. They were less welcoming of a Trump presidency. But everyone here seems to think that Donald Trump is going to win, even though, as you've been saying yourself, Jafar, the polling in the States suggests it is neck and neck at the moment, that there's really very little in it and that it could be swung on the night by tens of thousands of votes, if that. So, yeah, I was surprised to hear this, but certainly it'll be interesting to see how a Trump presidency, a second Trump presidency, affects the relationship with the UK, given the accusations he's made about the Labour Party interfering in the election recently, something that Sir Keir Starmer says hasn't happened, and that the Labour Party purely sends volunteers over there, as they have done with previous elections, to help out with the Democratic Party there. But yeah, that'll be interesting to see how that phone call goes. Should Trump win on the night and he gets that phone call, maybe a slightly awkward phone call from Sir Keir Starmer.
That's Paul Hawkins live for us from London. Paul, thank you very much indeed. Let's unpack this further. Joining me now live from the United Kingdom is Mark Shanahan. He's an associate professor of politics at the University of Surrey. Professor, great to have you here with us on TRT World. So, given Donald Trump's history of being critical of NATO and his past trade threats, do you think Europe could be in for a diplomatic and economic clash if Donald Trump wins again?
Absolutely. In 2016, we kind of dismissed what Donald Trump had to say as being less than serious. But generally, what he has to say, he then at least tries to follow through on. So, for instance, he's talked about leaving NATO. He feels that European nations don't contribute enough to NATO. He is very lukewarm in his support for Ukraine. And he is looking to institute a trade war with China that will have a big knock-on effect with Europe. We're looking at European imports to the American markets being tariffed up to 10 or 20%. On top of the prices that are charged now. We're looking at Chinese components with tariffs of 60%. So doing trade with America, already an asymmetric relationship, is going to become even harder. In terms of security, Europe may well have to look to securing its own borders, securing its own strength without much American input, because we are looking with Trump potentially at a very America first insular nation for at least the next 4 years. That's if he gets in. I was a little bit surprised by the vox pops that were done in London, because my experience is most people over here really do want Kamala Harris to win. They want continuity in the relationship between Europe and the United States, and they really don't want Trump back in office. There are very few people on the right in this country, but this is a country, the UK, that voted in 500 progressive, more liberal MPs just a few months ago.
Right, but Professor, if I may, what we heard there in London did not take me by surprise, because I'm hearing similar sentiments here in the United States. But again, our sample is very small, so it's really hard to make a prediction based on the people we have spoken to. But let me ask you, if Donald Trump were to win, how do you see his America First policies impacting U.S.-European relations?
It won't be good. Ever since really the end of World War II, America and Europe have been very, very closely aligned, whether it's the kind of special relationship that we talk of between the UK and the US, or more recently, very strong relationships in Brussels, in Paris, and in Berlin, united over trade issues, working very closely together on defence and on security issues. We're looking potentially at a change in the world order. A win for Donald Trump would very much strengthen the hand of Vladimir Putin. It would embolden autocrats all around the world. Xi Jinping would absolutely love a Trump victory. Trump is predictable in his unpredictability now. We know what we're going to get from him. And it's not going to be good for international relations. He is a zero-sum player. He sees everything as a business deal. He has to win and everyone else has to be the losers. That is simply not good in a very interconnected world.
Fascinating insights. Professor Shanahan, thanks very much for talking to us here on TRT World. I really appreciate your taking out the time.
Thank you.
Now, the U.S. presidential election could impact Bosnia and Herzegovina, as shifts in American foreign policy may affect regional stability, with leaders in Republika Srpska pushing for closer ties with Russia and challenging Bosnia's territorial integrity. TRT World's Samir Sefovic has more.
While the U.S. presidential election is primarily a domestic matter, the foreign policy of the next American presidency is of great importance, affecting countries around the world, including Bosnia and Herzegovina. The U.S. has been a key player in the Balkans since the signing of the Dayton Peace Agreement in 1995, which ended the Bosnian War. Over the years, the U.S. has provided substantial financial aid to Bosnia and Herzegovina, including security and diplomatic support aimed at promoting democracy and stability. However, with new geopolitical problems arising, there's growing concern over how much support and attention the region will receive, depending on which candidate is elected as president at the White House.
The political split in Bosnia and Herzegovina is on that particular line between Democrats and Republicans. In Bosnia and outside of Bosnia, neighboring countries who wants to divide Bosnia, is on the line of the Republican Party. The United States of America has a responsibility for this region because of Dayton Peace Accords. They maybe stopped the war, but they didn't resolve the problems who caused the war.
Despite being under U.S. sanctions, Bosnian Serb leader Milorad Dodik, an ally of Vladimir Putin, and political leaders in Banja Luka seek closer ties with Russia, undermining U.S. and EU policy. They often challenge Bosnia's territorial integrity with separatist rhetoric and are now hopeful that a new administration in Washington could bring about a shift in foreign policy toward the region.
President Dodik believes that Donald Trump would help him achieve his long-term goal, and that is independence of the Republika Srpska. But I don't think that is going to happen.
A change in U.S. policy could allow other international actors to step in, disrupting the current geopolitical order. For Bosnian citizens, the U.S. election is not just about territorial integrity. It's about the future of democracy, security, and stability. Separatist ambitions could bring about wide-ranging consequences for the entire region. Semir Sejfovic, TRT World, Sarajevo, Bosnia.
Okay, now, reinforcing America's network of alliances across the Asia-Pacific has been a pillar of the Biden administration's efforts to counter an increasingly assertive China. As the race to the White House draws closer, the U.S.'s partners in the region are bracing for a potential shakeup of these strategic blocs. Patrick Falk reports.
Former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe formed a famous friendship with Donald Trump during the latter's time in the White House. The two bonded over golf and sumo. This was a trophy Trump presented at a tournament in Tokyo after expressing to Abe his interest in the sport. Abe's diplomacy is seen to have helped advocate Japan's interests. Still, many experts say there's a clear preference among America's allies in the Asia-Pacific over who becomes the next president.
I think in terms of the predictability, definitely Harris.
By contrast with Trump's America First policy, the Biden administration has taken a so-called multilateral approach, forming partnerships with regional players based on shared interests and strengthening security alliances. The US and Japan notably deepened defense cooperation through the Quad grouping, which includes India and Australia also. Fears are a second Trump presidency could rock such blocs.
Japan is trying to get connected with their US allies and then also their partners in the Pacific, so that even if the US commitment becomes the less in the future, Japan can coordinate their policies and also the defense with the other countries.
In a sign America's allies are fortifying ties with one another, Japan held its first trilateral gathering with South Korea and Australia last month.
The US has acted as a counterweight to China's growing assertiveness in the region and supported its allies through deterrence. Even if its partners can coordinate with each other, experts say any pullback in Washington's security commitments will come as a blow.
Conflict in Ukraine and the Middle East, meanwhile, has drawn Washington's focus away from the region. Critics have accused the Biden administration of disengagement with Southeast Asia, critical to America's Indo-Pacific strategy. A survey conducted this year by the Singapore-based ICS Yusof Ishak Institute found more than half of people in the region would side with China if forced to choose.
Maybe the U.S. Is still the greater influence in the regions, but in terms of the trend, that's changing.
Despite differences in approach, many experts agree both Harris and Trump will look to keep up pressure on China.
I think U.S. engagement with this zero-sum mentality will not help the U.S. in terms of regaining grounds in the region. I think the U.S. have to show that its policies on Southeast Asia is not only just a derivative of the U.S.-China rivalries and to contain China.
Without addressing that, there'll be no easy way of rebalancing regional order in America and its allies' interests. Patrick Falk, TRT World, Singapore.
Now, the Indo-Pacific covers South Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific region. Home to 65% of the world's population, it accounts for more than 60% of the world's GDP, as well as half of global maritime transport. So this strategic significance makes it the center of a battle for hegemony. Grace Kuriakancha has more.
The United States and China contend for geopolitical and economic influence. Trade by the former with the region reached $2 trillion in 2022. Now, the U.S. has also established a solid military presence in the region with military deployments in Japan, South Korea, Philippines, Thailand, Australia, and New Zealand. China, on the other hand, has its Belt and Road Initiative in the Indo-Pacific region, as well as the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which has attracted $25.4 billion in direct investment in 10 years. So how is the control of regions achieved? Well, through cooperation such as multilateralism. The Asia-Pacific multilateralism emerged in the late 1980s and early 1990s. It includes platforms such as the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC, and the ASEAN Regional Forum. Both China and the U.S. are members or partners. But in multilateralism, the agenda tends to become overcrowded as parties involved may have different priorities, making it difficult to set goals and even reach a consensus. Now, with bigger groupings comes bigger challenges, hence the alternative of smaller groupings. In other words, mini-lateralism. This concept was seen in the Indo-Pacific region even before the late 2010s. It's even more significant now. The emergence of the quadrilateral security dialogue Quad nations, which include the United States, Japan, India, and Australia, as well as AUKUS made up of Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, propelled the U.S.-led free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. While these smaller groupings portray like-minded coalitions, they are even more susceptible to failure should one or two countries lose interest, like with Quad 1.0 in the late 2000s.
It's being branded, quote-unquote, the big lie. The claim by Donald Trump and his supporters that he was cheated out of the 2020 presidential election and would have won if the contest had not been rigged. Nowhere was the controversy deeper than in Georgia, where Donald Trump has been criminally charged with trying to overturn the results. Critics claim new rules introduced by Republicans will make it easier for Donald Trump to win this time. From Atlanta in Georgia, TRT World's North America correspondent John Brain reports.
A busker entertaining the lunchtime crowd in Atlanta, Georgia. Georgia's politics have been far less harmonious. This state produced the closest result of all in 2020, Joe Biden winning by less than 12,000 votes. It led to Donald Trump's now infamous phone call to the Secretary of State trying to overturn it.
I just want to find 11,780 votes. I think you have to say that you're going to re-examine it.
Ever since the last election, Georgia has been at the center of a bitter battle over the rules for the next one. The Republican-controlled state government here has tightened up the regulations on voter eligibility. It says it's protecting the integrity of the ballot. But the Democrats accuse it of voter suppression. The new rules require all voters to have state-issued identification and a registered address. It will also be easier for alleged irregularities in ballots to be challenged. Republicans say it was essential to fix the problems that beset the 2020 contest.
We had additional ballots coming in the days thereafter. We didn't have accurate ballot counts going into the close of the election. So moving forward here now in Georgia, we've remedied that.
But critics say the demand for a registered address disenfranchises homeless people and students living away from home in dorms.
Currently, there are attempts to subvert the will of the voter by suppressing and removing individuals who are duly empowered to vote from the election rolls, allow unlimited voter purges, allow a takeover of local election boards, and allow the removal of registered voters.
On the streets of Atlanta, there's concern among some voters.
Not going to be fair because I've heard that they got some pens that they get raised with fire. So that's why I'm taking my own pen.
You're going to take your own pen because you don't trust the system?
Because I don't trust the system.
I think it's terrible. We live in a democracy and we should be able to vote regardless. It should not be difficult to cast your vote.
But Democrat leaders believe the election will be fair, despite, not because, of all the rule changes.
Is it absurd? Absolutely. First of all, is it absurd the way we vote here? Absolutely. There's other states that you can register the day of. You can register 2 days before.
Whatever the eventual result, the election night count in Georgia will be under intense scrutiny. John Brain, TRT World, Atlanta.
For more on this, let's bring in TRT World's Randolph Nogel, who joins me live from New Orleans. Randy, good to see you. So let me ask you, is this quote-unquote big lie is still resonating with the Donald Trump's base, or has the legal fallout dampened his support?
Well, certainly there are indications, polling that's been done throughout this election campaign that indicate that certainly there is a lot of concern over whether this vote will be free and fair, despite the fact that a number of election officials across the country have taken extraordinary measures to try to reassure people. We were just in the last week in Colorado, where we saw one election center that was taking people through and showing them the process step by step to try to allay any fears. But of course, a lot of people are receiving this this messaging online. They're not sort of digging deep into the details of it. Donald Trump has repeated claims throughout not only this campaign, but really since the last national election, that there's a real risk of voter fraud in America. Recent polling suggests, however, that 8 in 10 Americans say that this vote will be somewhat fair, or they're confident that it will be completely fair. But of course, that number changes when you look at Trump supporters. More than a third say that they do not feel confident. And really, this campaign of trying to undermine people's confidence really just adds to what we see is a growing disenchantment with the political system in general. So certainly we'll be watching this. A lot of people, the indications are that on both sides, a third of Trump supporters, a third of Harris supporters are very afraid of what the result will be if the other party wins.
That's Randolph Nogel live for us from New Orleans. Randolph, thank you very much indeed. Abortion rights are dominating the 2024 U.S. election. Until 2 years ago, abortion was legal in the United States, but under Donald Trump, the Supreme Court changed the law, allowing states to make abortion a crime. It is driving many young women to the ballot box, as TRT World's Selena Downs reports.
Megan Kling lives in rural Wisconsin with her husband Sam and their 2 young daughters. Last summer, she was pregnant with their 3rd child, but at 23 weeks, she was told the fetus had no kidneys and no bladder.
We were called back to my doctor's office, and my physician then proceeded to tell me that there was something very wrong.
The state of Wisconsin bans abortions late in pregnancy. Megan would have been forced to give birth, so she crossed state lines to Minnesota, where the law is different.
I can't imagine being pregnant and wondering every day is my baby alive or not. And just knowing that that's the ultimate outcome no matter what.
Abortion has long divided America, and it's dividing the presidential candidates in this election. Kamala Harris says she's in favor of a woman's right to choose to have an abortion. Donald Trump's party officially oppose late-term abortions, although some Republicans are keen to moderate their message, saying many Republicans are also pro-choice. They're under pressure from anti-abortion campaigners who want a total ban across the whole of the United States.
And so our end goal, our gold standard, has been and will continue to be protecting all life from the moment of conception, because we will not rest until all of our preborn brothers and sisters are protected under our law.
But banning access to clinical abortions has simply driven many women to manage their own through the mail-order pill mifepristone. Kanaya self-managed her own abortion last summer when, as a junior in college, she discovered she was pregnant. She's from Kentucky, where abortion is banned. If she'd been forced to give birth, she says her life would be forever changed.
And it did make me think about, like, well, I do want to have kids in the future. I just don't want to have them
right now in this moment because, one, I'm not financially prepared to have them. I'm not prepared at all. And then I was thinking, like, okay, well, if you do decide that you want to continue this pregnancy to term, then I would have dropped out of college and I wouldn't have finished.
Nearly 2/3 of Americans believe abortion should be legal in the United States, especially in cases like rape or incest or where there is a threat to the mother's life. It is the #1 issue important to women voters under the age of 30 in this election. Abortion could influence the vote in some swing states, and that could in turn affect the entire outcome of this election.
And Selena Downs joins me outside the U.S. Capitol. Selena, great to see you. Great report there. I wonder, this is certainly such a divisive issue here in the United States. Could it really change the outcome of the upcoming presidential elections?
It's interesting. It could have a big impact. We know women feel really strongly about this issue. Up until 2 years ago, abortion was legal right across America. Under Donald Trump, the law was changed, essentially giving control back to the states to decide if they wanted to ban abortion. And we've seen a lot of states do just that. You have a huge swathe of states along the South, Texas, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, all these states which have very strict laws now governing abortion. And then you have very liberal states like California, New York, Maryland, here in the District of Columbia, where abortion is still legal. What this election is very interesting because on the ballot, voters will essentially be asked, who do you want for president? They will also, in 10 states, be asked, essentially, do you want to ban abortion in those states or do you want to allow it? And then that will be enshrined in those states' constitutions. So, for example, in Florida, abortion is currently banned after 6 weeks. Voters will be asked there, do they want to allow abortion up to 6 months? In Nebraska, they will be asked, it's 12 weeks currently. Do they want to continue to have that enshrined in the Constitution, or do they want to allow it for up to about 6 months, I think it is, as well? So essentially, this is a presidential race, but it is also being largely viewed as a referendum on abortion.
All right, fascinating insight. Selena, thanks very much for joining me here. So that's all for today. Remember, TRT World starts its rolling coverage of the U.S. elections on November 4th. We'll have live segments, in-depth analysis, and exclusive interviews from here in the United States and also from around the world. It's a broadcast you won't want to miss. So, for now, from me and my team here in Washington, goodbye. See you tomorrow at 17 GMT.